Thank you, Pastor Legay. It's great to be in your church, which is a historic church. And on this, the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington, to stand in a church where Martin Luther King stood is truly an honor. I also just want to give a particular attention to Senator Sandra Cunningham, who's been a dear friend of mine for a long time. Everything I'm going to talk about now, please understand that she has been championing for years. And she is really one of my heroes in the state for people standing up and saying things that may not be popular, but are persistently urgent in their need to be done. And in many ways, on this very historic anniversary, I just want to say that Sandra Cunningham is one of those people that is living out many of the ideals that were talked about 50 years ago when she wasn't even born. Right, that's right. That's right. Let's just say that for the record. So I want to thank everybody for being here this morning. I'm excited to share with you our first policy paper of the general election, which is squarely in line with, I think, the collective values and ideals of New Jersey: urban, suburban, north, south, black, white, Latino. This is an issue that should be uniting for all of us, right, left, conservative, liberal, Republican, Democrat. This is another one of those issues that is common sense, pragmatic, and should pull us all together to move not left or right, but to move forward. There's all this righteous talk going on in Washington about spending cuts, but somehow the gross daily waste of taxpayer dollars inside of our criminal justice system is rarely part of that conversation. It is time that it was. It's a system that we have, this criminal justice system, that's not cost effective. It's definitely not making our streets safer, and it's eroding the potential of people who could be contributing to our society instead of taking from it. Today, the US spends $74 billion on its prison system. That's greater than the GDP of 133 countries. And that gross taxpayer waste does not include the costs of police, of security, of gates, of fences. It doesn't include the costs of rearresting people over and over again. It doesn't include the cost of having to retry people over and over again. These are billions and billions of more dollars of taxpayer money that is senselessly being wasted. On top of that, it's costing us the productivity of hundreds of thousands of people who are behind bars for nonviolent drug offenses. But amidst all of these problems, there is some promise, there is some potential, there is untapped possibility, because finding solution is exactly the kind of work that I believe can build bridges between us, right and left, urban, suburban, north, south. It is this issue that actually could pull us together to accomplish what we want to accomplish: saving taxpayer dollars, creating safer communities, and empowering people. Here's why. Because if we are really concerned about the size of government, mass incarceration represents an ever-growing expenditure of taxpayer dollars and growth of government, producing failed results. If we're a country worried about our long-term global competitiveness, mass incarceration actually diverts resources that could be used to repair roads and bridges, to hire teachers, to invest in research and development, to help to aid the expansion of manufacturing. And at the same time, it takes human potential and actually undermines it. Whether they could be people that are paying taxes, creating businesses, buying products. It takes that human potential and transforms it instead into an expense that we all must pay. And so this idea of making America a global model for justice for equality under a law, a nation that lives up to its founding ideals. It's this criminal justice system that represents instead an impediment to actually achieving those ideals. That's one of the reasons why I chose to do this policy paper today, here, right now. The 50th anniversary of the March on Washington. In 1968, Martin Luther King came here to Metropolitan to support his Poor People's Campaign. It was an initiative to expand access to the American dream in more places and to every ethnicity, every color, every person of every background in our country. And I'll tell you, we've made a lot of progress towards achieving that dream. My life, and in fact my candidacy for the United States Senate seat, is a testimony to that progress. But we can't ignore the truth. We still have work to do. Many of our laws, as currently written, take us further away from Martin Luther King's dream and disproportionately impact poor and minorities. In New Jersey, where blacks make up 14% of the state's population, we represent more than 60% of the inmates in our state prisons. Let me say that again. Blacks in New Jersey make up 14% of the state's population, but over 60% of the inmates in our state's prison. There is something deeply and fundamentally wrong with those numbers. As mayor of Newark, I have been a participant in a criminal justice system that's continuing to let down our country. I've watched as our police arrest, rearrest, and then rearrest again, only to send the same person for another trip through a revolving door that consumes a gross amount of taxpayer dollars, rarely rehabilitates, makes offending more likely, and crime more of a reality for people in our community. Yes, we've driven down crime in Newark. I'm proud of that. But that progress has been made in the face of severe headwinds when it comes to the criminal justice system overall. I believe that New Jersey, that all of America, deserves a system that is really focused on making us safer. That is actually the end, the safety of our communities, not making the end more and more incarceration. We need to have a system that spends as few of our taxpayer dollars as possible to deliver that safety, that result that we would seek. We need to have a system that does not squander or inhibit the talents and potential and productivity of all of our citizenry. And finally, we need to have a system that reflects our values, that treats every American equally, that we have true equal protection under the law, and that brings communities together as opposed to dividing communities and dividing families. I know we can do better. I know that from our experience in Newark. Newark, like so many other cities across the country, has successfully innovated with new approaches for public safety. For example, we partnered with groups all across the spectrum. We actually even partnered with the right-leaning Manhattan Institute, a conservative think tank, to establish highly effective, pragmatic, common-sense programs to reduce the prevalence of reoffending, saving taxpayer dollars, and improving public safety all at once. We were able to work across the aisle because this issue is not about left or right. It's actually about solving problems, making communities safer. It's a basic question of, are we going to continue to fail, or are we going to move forward? And people who think this is a political minefield are wrong. Again, we've shown it on the local level. There are those who might seek to try to politicize this issue and talk about being soft on crime or weak on crime. But that belies the truth. These folks are wrong. And they're playing politics with our safety, with our tax dollars, and the lives of all of our citizens. If New Jersey elects me as their United States Senator on October 16th, here's what I will fight for. I'm going to fight for the lowering the gross expenditure and waste of taxpayer dollars. I'm going to fight for strategies that actually create safer communities and ensure that our criminal justice system actually reflects our values. America should not be the #1 incarceration nation on the globe. We can do better, we can spend less, we can empower people, and we can reflect our values. So first, and very specifically now, what does that mean? It means that we should reduce prison entries for non-violent offenders by reforming drug policies, focusing on treatment and rehabilitation, things that drive outcomes that we desire, and not just incarceration for incarceration's sake. We know that low-level, non-violent drug offenders comprise the majority of the federal prison population. Let me say that again. The majority of our prison population are low-level, non-violent drug offenders. And the number of drug offenders in state facilities has increased 13-fold since 1980. Since 1980, 13 times more the number of drug offenders in our state facilities. We now spend more than $51 billion annually to fight the war on drugs, a war that has not been successful and won't be if we continue the same course. I was just with the President and Attorney General Holder yesterday, and they deserve real praise for taking on this fight. But in order to achieve real progress, Congress should act, the Senate should act by increasing federal funding for proven evidence-based programs like drug courts, for example, that divert low-level drug offenders from prison and actually save taxpayer dollars and get better results. Here in New Jersey, sending a person to drug court actually costs $13,000 less than sending a person to prison. In Newark, we established the Newark Community Solutions Program to provide the first community court in New Jersey. The community court model provides municipal judges with increased sentencing options for non-violent offenders and has improved public perceptions of justice, given judges the flexibility to reduce our prison population that actually creates better outcomes for the people involved and for the safety of our community. And in addition to this, investing in proven evidence-based programs like drug courts, we need to have, finally, without demagoguery, we need to have a structured national conversation about decriminalizing marijuana. Each year, more than 700,000 people are arrested for marijuana possession. I don't know if Dave Jambuso is one of them. I don't want to make any accusations whatsoever to our friends in the media. But over 700,000 people have been arrested for marijuana possession. I just want to make sure you were listening, Dave. We need a discussion that brings together everyone. Everyone needs to come to the table and put aside the demagoguery and the fear-mongering. Everybody, from police and prosecutors, public defenders, public health experts, academics, community leaders, all stakeholders, to consider whether our approach to drug policy is actually fostering public safety, saving taxpayer dollars, and empowering people to succeed. That's the three things that we should be looking to achieve. Not more incarceration, not more arrests, but we want to make sure that our marijuana policy in America is achieving less taxpayer spending, more public safety, and more empowerment of people. Second, we must do more to ensure that our laws are applied fairly. This is another shocking incongruency between who we say we are and the reality in the country. Blacks in America are 3.7 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana possession and use than white people, despite the fact that their usage rates are no different. Meanwhile, marijuana arrests now make up nearly half of all of our drug arrests. That's over 7 million marijuana possession arrests annually between 2001 and 2010. And the tough on crime policies of making that climate of the 80s and 90s actually stripped away judicial and prosecutorial power. It made our judges and our prosecutors less powerful in their ability to achieve the outcomes that we're discussing. It inhibited their ability to bring about just and commensurate sentencing. Because of all of these reasons, imprisonment continues to be concentrated even more disproportionately amongst poor people, disproportionately amongst minority males. Today, 1 in every 15 black males is in prison or in jail, compared to 1 in 106 white males. To address racial disparities, we should eliminate mandatory minimum sentencing for low-level drug offenses. Research shows that mandatory minimum sentences have virtually no deterrent effect whatsoever. They do, however, produce higher and higher costs for taxpayers. And actually, as I've seen as a mayor in America, they actually harm public safety. To address this problem, at a minimum, Congress should pass the Justice Safety Valve Act of 2013 and the Smarter Sentencing Act of 2013. These bills would give judges more discretion to sentence federal offenders below the mandatory minimums and would reduce the length of expensive mandatory sentences for nonviolent drug offenders. Finally, we also need to develop incentives, and this is really important. Incentives so that federal prosecutors are focused on what we want them to be focused on, which is outcomes. To focus on the outcomes of public safety, cost to taxpayers, and the recidivism rate, as opposed to being focused on more and more convictions and incarceration rates. This does not make America safer. If we focus on the outcomes we desire, more public safety, less expenditure of taxpayer dollars, and empowering people in the long run to be successful, then all of America wins. Now we're asking prosecutors and measuring their success based upon outcomes in their jobs that are about incarceration and imprisonment. And if we're focusing on changing the focus of prosecutors, this is something we should actually do across the criminal justice system. That means doing a better job of approaching justice holistically. More than 680,000 inmates are released from federal and state prisons each year, and they're not being properly prepared for leaving and not reintegrating into public life. And so they reoffend time and time again at incredibly high rates. And what does this mean? It means we see more crime. It means we see more of an expenditure of taxpayer dollars. I've seen this happen again and again and again. I drive around with some police officers, and they know the people involved in this nonviolent drug game so well, they could actually name the kids on the streets. There's a relationship going on, and if you talk to our police officers in cities like Jersey City, Camden, they know that this is a ridiculous game that they're involved in. They're trapped, they're stuck on this treadmill, doing so much hard work, but getting nowhere. Our communities are not getting safer, but they do know that taxpayers are spending more and more money. So we must, as a society, spend less money, but spend it smarter by investing in those things that make our neighborhoods safer, by investing in those things that empower people, like investing in education and skill building and drug treatment and the facilitation of family communication to ensure that formerly incarcerated people can reintegrate into their families and communities, thus not only saving those taxpayer dollars, but helping them be more productive members of society, contributing to us all. And I know that this works. How do we know? Well, one is there was a Washington State study that found for every dollar spent on correctional education, that state saved $12, and that $1 million investment in education prevented 600 crimes compared to 350 crimes prevented by $1 million invested in incarceration. So the evidence is there. The studies show that these programs work to achieve our ends, to reduce recidivism and increase employment the federal government should support the programs that allow people in prison to obtain a high school diploma or a secondary degree. And we need to also increase funding for proven and effective drug treatment in prisons. This is crazy that we imprison people with addictions, which caused their imprisonment in the first place. We don't treat that addiction, we just spend the money to warehouse them, then we return them to the streets, and we wonder why they recidivate at such higher rates. That's madness. Today, only 20% of inmates with drug or alcohol addiction actually receive treatment. Think about this. Only 20% of people are receiving treatment, therefore they're released to go back into their communities, still addicted, to do the crimes again. This shortfall actually costs taxpayers so much money. Every dollar spent on proven treatment and substance abuse in the criminal justice system saves as much as $4 for taxpayers. I want to go to another point I feel very passionate about. We need to end the use of private prisons. Thank you, Senator. Think about this for a second. Attaching a profit motive to imprisoning people has to be troubling to the spirit of America. But today, the U.S. is becoming increasingly reliant on private, for-profit prisons. And yet studies show that some such private prisons offer worse outcomes at a higher cost to taxpayers. In fact, they have more recidivism and cost more in the process. For existing private prisons, we should do at the very least stepping up oversight and regulation to make sure that our taxpayer dollars are not being used for the profits of some to the detriment of taxpayers. And that brings me to my last point. If we want to keep offenders from returning to jail and reduce all the associated costs to society and taxpayers, we must do smart investments in reentry programs. Today, the 3-year rearrest rate for formerly incarcerated people in New Jersey is about 55%, and the reincarceration rate is 31%, and that's too high. These are statistics of a system that is fundamentally failed. It fails the offender, and it fails us, the taxpayers, who should be able to count on an outcome better than simply a return to incarceration. A good job is the best tool to reduce the likelihood of an offender going back to jail, so let's take steps to generate jobs. Look, I know we need to make exceptions for certain crimes and jobs that are particularly sensitive, but we need to institute ban-the-box measures. Public employers should be prohibited from inquiring about a job applicant's criminal history prior to the interview stage of a job application. Private employers should be encouraged to do the same. 50 cities, 8 states, including Newark, have enacted some form of ban-the-box measures to give formerly incarcerated people a fair shot to demonstrate their qualifications. Second, let's create evidence-based incentive programs that foster the creation of state-led employment programs for the formerly incarcerated. States where recidivism rates fall as a result of these job programs should be eligible for grant programs. In other words, if you can show that you can reduce taxpayer dollars and empower people to succeed and create safe communities, we as a federal government should be investing in those things that save money and get higher outcomes. And so this is what we know in Newark. To reduce recidivism in Newark, in our city, we focus on creating viable employment options. For example, our Office of Reentry has demonstrated success in placing formerly incarcerated people into jobs upon release. In our reentry programs, 60% of the enrollees found private, unsubsidized jobs. Of that population, 70% retained their jobs for 6 months or longer, lowering the rearrest rate, lowering the crime rates, and actually empowering people to be successful. And so we need to focus on not only jobs, but also those transitional job programs. Inmates frequently re-enter society with very low job skills, and transitional jobs can play a really key role here. Transitional employment allows the formerly incarcerated to gain experience, to demonstrate their work ethic. And so in Newark, we started such programs, one of which is our Clean and Green program in partnership with the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice and the Newark Conservancy. And these young men and women coming out of prison have gained that work experience, have gained those resume builders, and have provided our communities with critical work. Participants have honed their soft skills, such as punctuality, and actually got good references for jobs going into real jobs. We should fund programs like this, and other cities across the state and country should have that opportunity because, again, it saves taxpayer money, leads to safer communities, and empowers people to contribute. And so finally, I want to say the last component has to be us making it easier for people who are out of jail to stay out of jail. And that starts with changing federal rules that prohibit nonviolent drug offenders from ever receiving assistance, public housing, and access to student loans. Look at this. You could have been arrested for a nonviolent drug offense when you were 18 years old, and now you're my age, 44, and you've been playing by the rules, working hard, and you're still denied certain public benefits that could actually help you get a college education and better provide for your family. More than 200,000 students have lost financial aid eligibility because of nonviolent drug convictions, including possessions of small amount of marijuana. We've had former presidents that have admitted in their younger days that they have been involved in low-level usages of marijuana. And why are we denying future presidents from getting their education or getting support in doing that? That's unfair on its face and needlessly destructive. It does not reflect our values. Meanwhile, though, between 30 and 50% of people on parole, and in urban areas, between 30 and 50% are homeless. Access to housing, legal services, transitional assistance, and education can strengthen the likelihood that individuals who are willing to work hard and to rehabilitate can have productive, law-abiding lives. So these are just a few ideas today to reform a system that is clearly not working, that's making us less safe in our communities, that's a gross waste of taxpayer dollars, and failing to reflect our shared values as a country. You can find the full plan at www.corybooker.com. There's no silver bullet that's going to fix all that's broken in our society. And ultimately, ending cycles of incarceration and hopelessness will mean doing even more things. The good senator here knows that. It means dealing with issues of poverty. It means dealing with things like prenatal care. So this is a larger agenda, but clearly this is a way to go that can unite people on both sides of the political aisle in this cause of reducing taxpayer dollars, in this cause of making our communities safer, in this cause of elevating human potential. And so this is the pragmatism that's at the core of this plan. It's the pragmatism that I intend to bring to Washington, D.C. It's that uniting call to our country, to communities that we have as a part of our history. It was Martin Luther King who said clearly that he refuses to believe that the bank of justice is bankrupt. Well, now is the time to make justice a reality, he said, for all of God's children. The people of Jersey City, the people of Newark, the people of New Jersey deserve to have a criminal justice system that is fundamentally about justice. Criminal justice system that does not make America the leading nation in incarceration, but makes America the leading nation in justice and security, is in the sensible application of taxpayer dollars and the elevation of what is the truth of America, is that we can be a country for liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you.